central problem that I'm having so far with my journey into Judaism, or more observant Judaism, is understanding. It's very clear and easy for me to understand how the larger, kind of more understandable concepts in Judaism, like being kind to one another, charity, honoring your parents, living, in a just way, equality for people, all of those things promote an idea of us as Jews being a light unto the nations. Far less clear to me how some of the more minuscule details that seem like they are very difficult to understand, knowing if the mezuzah should be pointed straight up or if it should be lying flat down, or whether the paragraphs that are written on the parchment need to be side by side or one above the other. It's very difficult to understand how that promotes holiness in the world, and how does that promote my own closeness to God.
Okay, I think you're touching on maybe more than one quite deep issue. Let me circle the issue a little bit with some tidbits that are designed just to provoke a certain wider lens, and then I'll see if I can say something systematic. But I think really to do justice to what you're asking would take more time than I can afford in the Q&A. Someone once said that Aristotle was probably, not counting Jewish scholarship, maybe the greatest thinker in the history of the world. He created whole new sciences. I'm a logician. He created logic out of whole cloth. There was no such thing as logic beforehand. And metaphysics and astronomy and botany and classification. He was really an extraordinarily creative and deep thinker. He lacked two crucial instruments, a microscope and a telescope. If you restrict your field of vision to a particular realm and use that to orient yourself and to define what's real and what's significant, then any item that comes from another realm out of your field of vision is going to be foreign. One of the chief messages that the Jewish people has to give the world is not just to be kind to your neighbor in ways that you can easily understand, and to be charitable and to pursue justice in ways that you can easily understand, because your easy understanding comes from a perspective that has no telescope and no microscope. There's another dimension of reality, I won't say as real as tables, much more real than tables, and that is that there's a creator, that the world we live in exists for a purpose, that the actions that we perform contribute to that purpose, do not contribute to that purpose, and that's not visible to the naked eye and the person who doesn't know Jewish literature based on prophecy, which gives us access to that information. So of course it's not going to look meaningful or reasonable to you. Another example that I give is someone who's never seen or heard of surgery. You take him to an operating theater. After a while, he says to you, "These must be very religious people." I say, "Why do you say that?" It's because, look, before they use any instrument, they dip it in a glass of water. That must be a ritual. It really doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any difference to the instrument. Whether it's got a little water on it or doesn't have any water on it. That can't make any difference. It must be, but it's alcohol. And alcohol is an absolute disinfectant. And they don't know that. They don't know that they're bacteria. They don't know it's a disinfectant. So to them, it just looks like an empty ritual. So as I say, one of the messages that the Jewish people has to give to the world is ethical humanism isn't enough, because it's like living your life without telescopes and microscopes. You're just not getting in touch with that larger reality. Let's suppose that someone has a drug manufacturing facility. Well, the FDA wants to certify it. They go through the procedure and they say, look, over here you have 3 people working on the product. If these 3 people are simultaneously distracted, there's a 1 in 100 chance for contamination. Change it! How detail obsessed can you be to obsessive compulsive? 3 people simultaneously distracted, 1 in 100 chance. Yeah, but it's a drug. It's a drug. If it gets contaminated, people are going to die. Well, how many people are going to die? If 1 in a million die, it's too many. We don't produce drugs that will kill 1 in a million people. We don't do that. I mean, we may make mistakes, but if I know that it's going to kill 1 in a million, change it. We don't tolerate it. That's not fanatic. That's because health is very important. And we are dedicated to preserving standards for the quality of health. Someone thinks of Shabbos. I listened to a call-in program. I was sick a number of years ago, and I was listening to the call-in programs on Israeli radio. There's a kibbutz in the south run by the Reform movement, Reform Judaism. And the interviewer said, when you have a question about what you can or cannot do on Shabbos, how do you decide it? He said, well, we appoint 2 or 3 members of the kibbutz to go through the Mishnah and to read the relevant sections and then to give us an opinion and usually follow their opinion. Okay, suppose they had a question of crop rotation or insecticide or a new type of fertilizer or what to invest in for the next 5 years in terms of the agricultural world market. Would they assign 2 or 3 of their amateur kibbutz members, one who drives a tractor and one who's the kibbutz botanical expert or the kibbutz economist, to read through the relevant literature and give an opinion? Of course they wouldn't. They'd hire an expert from Tel Aviv University, pay him a good sum of money to come down and give him an extra opinion. Because making money in the agricultural market is important. And Shabbos is just a voluntary Saturday club where you take a day off and, well, you do it this way, I do it that way. It doesn't matter much. As long as that's your perspective, that's living without telescopes and microscopes. But if you think that the creator of the universe, when he revealed himself at Sinai, one of the 10 pronouncements that he gave to the Jewish people as a whole was Shabbos, and it's mentioned 20 times in the Torah, so it must be very, very important, then it isn't a matter of simply an amateur, casual perusal of sources from 1800 years ago, but it's a matter of serious scholarship that we want a serious opinion about. So I think that your framework of understanding and evaluation is very severely limited. And I think that's a key problem. When you study a little bit about from Jewish sources and you see how the world that we observe and understand in simple natural terms interlaces with that other world, how the two of them are integrated, that no thing is free from the influence of that larger world, then you begin to understand that these things can matter, and can matter importantly. Now, this actually has happened thousands of times. It's October or September, and you're in New Hampshire, and a fellow who owns some acreage is burning his leaves. And you say to him, you can't do that. You're polluting the atmosphere. And he says, you believe that? They're pulling the wool over your eyes. Don't you know that those are radicals who are trying to overthrow the government? He has his story, right? He said, but look, we have CO2 levels. If you believe in global warming, don't believe in global warming. And we've done studies and so forth and so on. He thinks it's all propaganda. What do you do with him? He said, well, you're out of touch with reality, and I'm calling the fire department, and we're putting out your fire. Because we know better than you. We know a reality that you don't know. He thinks it's harmless because he doesn't know any better. So people who don't know the larger reality are often convinced that what they're doing is perfectly harmless and insignificant. And those who know the larger reality say, we know better than you. That's something else significant is going on here. When you look at the history of the Jewish people, you see elements that I believe, and I've written about this at length, cannot be naturally explained. The survival of the Jewish people is something which cannot be naturally explained. Then there must be something in this system that beat the ancient Greeks and beat the ancient Romans and beat the ancient Egyptians and the Assyrians and all of them. And we alone represent a culture that has continuity for 3,000 years. So something's going on here that isn't going on elsewhere. That you can see. It's just you can't understand it unless you invest in it. So those are some things to think about. Okay, this is Q&A for those who are new. This is, oh, yeah.
How Okay, how does with the Jewish law system, it works that you need like two witnesses?
Two, sorry, I'm not getting two what?
Like for someone to catch someone for murder, you need two witnesses, he needs a warning. Like the chances of him murdering someone is, catching someone like that is so unlikely. And then how would it work in the future? Like now, we got DNA.
Okay, there are two things to say here. One is, and this is really very important, there are many capital crimes in Judaism. And when people read about those capital crimes and they start really from behind your question and they say, wow, all those actions are capital crimes, statutory capital punishment only applies, as he said, when there are witnesses, when there's a warning that's issued, and the person has to acknowledge the warning. He has to say, yes, I know, and I'm doing it anyway. How often are you going to have statutory capital punishment if those are the conditions? Let's talk about breaking Shabbat. And here's George Schwartz, who wants to have a cigarette. He takes out a cigarette, takes out a lighter. Around the bend come Reuven and Shimon and say to him, George, it's Shabbat. That's a capital crime. If he wants a cigarette, what's he going to do? He's going to say, oh, golly, thanks for telling me. I'm so distracted. I completely forgot about it. Thanks, guys. Have a nice day. And as they stroll around the corner, he'll light up a cigarette. If what he wants is a cigarette, that's what he's going to do. Why would he say, yes, I know, it's Shabbat. I know it's a capital crime. Watch, in your face. And he lights it up. Why would he do that? Because he doesn't want a cigarette. He wants a public anti-Shabbos demonstration. That's what capital punishment is for. Not for the cigarette, not for hidden microphones or hidden cameras, but for a public anti-Shabbos demonstration. So that, I think, now we can get to your question. So then it's going to be very rare that anybody's going to suffer capital punishment. What about murder? You know, the guy's about to pull the trigger and say, oh, you're going to swing. I mean, well, get killed for this. He says, oh, thanks for telling me, I'll get him another time when you're not around. How often is that going to happen? This is what's called statutory capital punishment. This is a case where, if the facts are established, the law requires capital punishment. But courts have a great deal of prerogative where they can take action above and beyond what the law requires them to do. And if there is substantial evidence that a person has committed murder, he can be penalized, not through the statutory process, but through what I could call a judicial prerogative process, and steps can be taken to make sure that he doesn't injure the public. He can be locked up, and other measures can be taken against him. So what you're talking about now is only where the law requires that action, but the action can be applied, or similar actions can be applied, without the law requiring it, the law simply allowing it. And that's up to the court to decide.
So it doesn't mean just because if there's no two witnesses, you won't get away with it.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And then, so in the future, you think, when the best of is here, would they use DNA, would they use evidence, modern technology?
Well, okay, I don't want to go through the science of DNA technology, but it's not 100% DNA technology. And you'll have to be trusting the honesty of the people who do the DNA tests, which might be called into question. And there are lots of ways in which these things can be. And you see these things go through phases. Do you use a lie detector test or don't you? Some decades yes, and some decades no. And psychologists come in on this side and that side. And these things are controversial and not. If you've lived as long as I have and you've gotten used to the number of scientific reversals that take place, the idea of killing somebody on the basis of DNA testing today is, to me, a little bit. Brain death. I just read an article last year that they surveyed 40 years of medical procedure based on brain death. And the criteria are not clear. The tests for the criteria are not clear. They're not consistent. There were proven cases where it was done wrongly. It's the hottest thing and the most up-to-date scientific criterion and so forth and so on. Yeah, but when it comes down to nuts and bolts practice, it often doesn't work that way. So I'm a little skeptical. of these things. Yeah, what else is on people's minds.
How can we be sure of the authenticity of the Zohar?
How can you be sure of the authenticity of the Zohar? Well, first of all, you've been here long enough to know that I'm not going to take the bait of telling you how you can be sure. Sure, for sure, proof, infallibility, that's not my language. That's not my language. I don't believe in that for anything. Not knowing who your parents are, not knowing whether you're dreaming or not. I don't believe in infallibility for anything. I've studied too much philosophy for that. But you could talk about good evidence. Now, there's a fellow named Moshe Idel, who was a professor at the Hebrew University of Kabbalah. And he's not Orthodox, which means everything he writes is scholarly and fair and well researched and solid and valid. If you're Orthodox, it would be propaganda. But he's not Orthodox. And he points out, that's a little bit of an irony, but I am playing to a certain public image now. If he's not Orthodox, then you can trust him. He wrote a book about Kabbalah, which won some prizes. And in it, he points out that the Zohar, which was published in the 14th century, which describes discussions in the yeshiva of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai around the beginning of the Common Era. By the way, it was not written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's a mistake. It's discussions in that yeshiva. He's the chief, he's the head of the yeshiva, but many other scholars are quoted. And it was Rabbi Abba, one of his students, who edited the material. Rabbi Shimon told him to edit it. And the form we have is from Rabbi Abba's editing of those discussions. And it is the chief, oldest written work of Jewish mysticism. Very, very difficult to understand. There are many commentaries that have been written on it. Now, it was only published in the 14th century. So some people wondered whether the fellow who published it didn't really write it and just phrase it in such a way as if it were a much older work. And there was controversies for some decades after this fellow died, and the manuscript was copied and distributed. There was some controversy as to whether it was really genuine or not. Moshe Idel points out that the controversy was relatively short. It was less than a century. And a consensus was formed that it is genuine. One of the reasons that the consensus took hold is that there are very few new themes in the Zohar. All the major themes are present in the Talmud and the Midrash 1,000 years earlier. In the Talmud, the Midrash, these themes are expressed in hints, in sometimes descriptions that could be understood in many ways, and they could be understood in a straightforward, simple philosophical way, but they also might point to a more hidden type of meaning. When you read the text of the Talmud or the text of the Midrash, you could think that it's only referring to the simpler dimension. But when you have the Zohar's information behind you, you go back and read those texts, you can see they chose this word rather than that word. They put the items in a particular order. They related this to this and not this to that. And it fits the Zohar's description directly. Therefore, the controversy, says Moshe Idel, was a relatively tame controversy. No one claimed that the material was foreign. No one claimed that the material was heresy. The only question was, is this really a genuinely ancient work, or is it a more modern work? You find passages in Nachmanides, 200 years before, some of them read word for word what you have in the Zohar. If the Zohar was made up 200 years later, it wouldn't be easy to explain why that should be so. There's a book called Sha'arei Ora, which my Chavrusim introduced me to. We're in the middle of reading it. And one of the commentators points out the custom of this book is when he quotes something from the Talmud or the Midrash, he tells you where it's quoting from. There's one piece where he says, the rabbi said, and he doesn't give the source. That piece reads almost word for word as a piece of the Zohar. So the commentator says, look, he lived before the Zohar was published. He knew there was this material. It wasn't identified as a book yet. So he gave credit to the rabbis, ancient rabbis, as the authors of it, but he couldn't cite the source because the source wasn't published yet. But you know that that material existed. So we have many indications that the material existed, that the ideas were not new ideas, and that the vast majority of people who lived at that time when it was published came to agree that it was genuine material. Now, if somebody wants to say, in spite of all that, that it really isn't genuine, then my answer, and this is my answer for all such issues, is it possible that it's not genuine? Sure, so are leprechauns possible. Anything's possible. But if you have positive evidence that it's genuine, and you think it's really not genuine, you now owe evidence that it's not genuine. The ball's in your court. Burden of proof is on you. So they say, well, there are a few words in the Zohar which really come from later Spanish. Okay, so a few foreign words crept into a work of 500 pages. That means the whole work is modern, not ancient? That's not a good inference, seems to me. So I think all of our the evidence that we have available is supports the idea that it really is ancient material.
I'm not understanding that just because it matches with a work from earlier times, what if the publisher just copied that work?
No. The themes. It said that names of God refer to God's characteristics. One name one name is associated with strict justice. One name is associated with mercy. One name is associated with loving kindness. That's what you read in the open material. Associated with. The name is associated with. Right? So you think, okay, it's the name of God, but this name is associated with one of his characteristics. Then the Zohar tells you there is nothing but characteristics. The thing that has the characteristics is beyond your understanding altogether, beyond all possible description. The names are just names of different characteristics. See? Oh, that's deeper. That's a fundamental orientation. And the rabbis, expressing themselves in a public manner for everyone to read, didn't go that far. They didn't go that far. Similarly to the fact that the Torah itself uses anthropomorphic terms for God. And we all know that God has no physical form. But the Torah was written, says the Kuzari and says the Rambam, both of them, that it was written for a whole people, and a whole people will find it difficult to adjust to the idea that there is a thing that has no physical presence. So it's written that way, and then you have to understand that it's metaphor. For those who are sophisticated enough to take that, they understand it's metaphor. So the rabbis of the Talmud did the same thing. There's a hidden, very precise, abstract reality, and they wrote about it in such a way that a person wouldn't be forced to deal with that. This name is associated with mercy. To be told there is nothing but mercy. There isn't a thing that has the mercy, because for us that thing is beyond all conception. That's an idea that many people are going to find difficult. So they say associated with. When you look at the Zohar, you see that's what the Zohar says. You see the Zohar is what's the deeper reality behind those rabbinic remarks, and you have them all over the place. Once you have the Zohar's framework available to you, all sorts of things that the rabbis say become possible to understand. Without it, it's very, very difficult to understand. Yeah.
How the Hasidic community goes more towards the Kabbalah side, as far as learning from the Arizal, and so they get the sources through the Zohar as like an explanation on the Zohar and things like that.
Yes. So far, I'm hearing you making a statement. What I
So basically svarim, which are written by different sects of Hasidic communities. They take from the Zohar to explain it on a level that could be understood.
Yes, I should say, I mean, because we live in a certain context, or we grow up in a certain country, and we grow up in a certain type of community, sometimes our vision is not quite comprehensive. When you talk about the attitude of the Jewish people as a whole towards Jewish mysticism, I think you have to start with the Sephardi world. In the Sephardi world, the Zohar and the Arizal are everyday diet. They start studying these things or learning things or reciting these things when they're 8 years old. And everybody does it, and it's taken for granted. They have public shiurim, public classes in the most difficult of the mystical works. There's on the next hill over, there's a Sephardi area. They have a big synagogue there with many. And when I lived here behind the yeshiva, I used to daven there from time to time. One day it was dusk, and a boy came up to me, maybe 12 years old, total stranger. He said to me, "Why do we daven Mariv? Evening prayers. Why do we daven Mariv?" Talmud says it was really optional, but then men at least took it on as a fixed custom. So today, no, he said. And he recited a whole long Kabbalistic formula, which at the time I had no clue what he was talking about. And then he just walked off and disappeared in the mist. Like, total stranger. I thought to myself, that's a 12-year-old Sephardi boy. He knows how it works. So in the Sephardi world, the Kabbalah is very, very widespread. And by the way, you may have heard this idea that you can't study Kabbalah till you're 40. That is a position of one of the great Ashkenazi commentators, the Shach, but very few follow him. That's not binding Jewish law, not at all. The Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, who was one of the great mystics in Tzfas, wrote that you have to be 20 years old. You should be married and you should have good character. But he wrote 20 years old, not 40 years old. And Sephardim will start with kids and teach this material. Now, what Hasidim did was this. You're quite right. In the European world, you had the Hasidim who, I believe, I'm not much of a historian, but I believe what the Hasidim did is they borrowed from the Sephardi world and brought Sephardi customs and ideas into the Ashkenazi world of Europe. And they created a kind of combination of the two. They changed the nusach of the prayer to a certain extent. What they did was not so much studying the Zohar itself, but as you said, they took Kabbalistic ideas and used them to inform verses in the Torah, statements in the Talmud, or the way in which we do various mitzvos. They used that to give greater depth to the practices that are what are called exoteric, which are common and public to everyone else. And they did that. I'll give you an example, and this will go back now to relate this to what you asked in the beginning. Many mitzvos are based on right and left. You put the hand, the tefillin, on the weaker arm. For the vast majority of people, it's the left arm. And you put on your right shoe first and take your right shoe off last. And when you wash your hands, you first wash your right hand and then your left hand. And when you go around when a Kohen goes around the altar on a ramp, he goes around counterclockwise and only counterclockwise. What's going on? What's going on is that right is always given precedence over left. So, in terms of your feet, the right foot is more inclusively shod. It has a shoe on it more time than the left foot does. And the first hand that you wash is your right hand. And when you walk around counterclockwise, if you're facing the altar, then the right hand is leading and the left hand is following. The right is always given precedence over the left. Why? Because the right is loving kindness and the left is strict justice. And although God relates to the world in both ways, they're not equal. The purpose of creation is one, loving kindness. That's the only whole soul purpose for the creation. Strict justice comes in only as a way of implementing loving kindness. So in many of our commandments, when we do them, we give precedence to the right to keep that fixed in our minds, that the focus has to be on loving kindness. And that when you have to use strict justice, you only use it when it's going to contribute ultimately to loving kindness. So when you have that insight, which comes essentially from the Kabbalah, though the Talmud does talk about it to a certain extent, so you get a deeper and richer appreciation for what you're doing when you're doing it. And that is a mitzvah in Judaism altogether, that this is really a crucial point. Blind obedience is valid, but it's not ideal. A person who doesn't know the reasons for what he's doing and does them blind has satisfied the mitzvah and he'll be rewarded for it. But it is a Jewish general responsibility to learn the reasons for what you're doing, so that when you do it, you have your mind on board, not just your limbs and your pocketbook, that you're thinking about what you're doing and understanding the reason for what you're doing. And then the Hasidic literature that you're referring to helps to achieve that.
So, back to kind of the theme of my first question. Gentiles have the 7 Noahide laws, which are like the big things. Be nice to one another, live in a righteous way. So, are we to assume that because they don't have the details, they are incapable of reaching the same spiritual heights that Jews are? If that's the case, how is that fair to them? And aren't there instances of non-Jews being quite spiritually elevated people as well?
Okay, let's contrast the Jewish system with the Indian caste system. In Hinduism, you have 4 castes. You are born into that caste. Because of your birth, that's your identity, and nothing you do to change it. By contrast, our sources describe the creation of the world and its subsequent history in the following way. God created 2 humans, a man and a woman. They were confronted with a challenge. Had they succeeded in meeting that challenge, human history would have been over. That would have been the end of human history. No upper group and lower group, no elite and common, simply 2 people on a certain level. Okay, they failed. They failed and the whole world was degraded. Human beings were degraded. The environment was degraded. The goal was to operate in the new degraded atmosphere in a way to recover some relationship to the original reality. I'm quoting now The Way of God by Luzzatto. The door was open for everybody to do it equally. There was no upper group or lower group. No one was selected. The only one who did it was Abraham. Okay, that's stage 2. At that time, there was an establishment of the basic national units, and each national unit had a certain character. Abraham, because of what he chose, gave a certain character to his national unit. But the national units were fluid. Anybody who wanted to join and participate in the Jewish national character was free to do so. And in fact, Abraham and Sarah attracted thousands of people who participated in their way of life. When they went down to Egypt, 70 of them, those people eventually assimilated out. When God gave the Torah at Sinai, our sources tell us that he offered it to the rest of the world simultaneously. Join, be part of it. Let the Torah be accepted by the world as a whole. That's the 3rd shot that God had at reaching everybody equally. Everybody but the Jewish people said no. After the Torah was given to the Jewish people, the door is open for converts. We have had converts from day 1 till the present day. The ideal resolution would be that everybody should convert. So you have a situation where you have an elite, but the door is open for anyone to join, and God repeatedly put out his hand and offer to accept everybody in. Now you tell me, somebody who's outside is not fair? That sounds a bit odd. You know, if the door is open, if anybody can join and everybody can join, and people say no, they've been given a fair shot. And they've turned it down. So yes, Jews have certain capacities and abilities and heights that they can reach because they have a much greater level of responsibility than non-Jews do. A non-Jew can earn his place in the world to come by fulfilling his mitzvos well. It is certainly true that some non-Jews fulfill their mitzvos better than some Jews fulfill their mitzvos. It's certainly true that some non-Jews achieve a spiritual level that some Jews do not achieve. That definitely is true. But to think of it as parallel, let's say, to the Indian caste system is really missing out on the fact that in the Indian caste system, you're stuck by a factor of birth and you cannot change your identity. Whereas here, the door is still open, and it has been open from the beginning of time for anyone and everyone to take that step up. Yeah.
I don't know much about magic, but from the fact that the Egyptians, they managed to brush away the Maccas and seem like not be convinced of a creator, why didn't Hashem show something which is more, something which is not, you can't just brush away and say, let's say it's magic or something.
You're not appreciating the mental set of the ancient world. It's not a question of magic or not magic. Ancient people were surrounded by the actions of the gods all the time. The sun comes up every day, doesn't it? You know why it comes up? Not because the earth is rotating on its axis. Give me a break. There's a sun god, and the sun god makes it come up every day. The Nile overflows and fertilizes the whole basin there, and it's tremendously agriculturally productive because the Nile god makes it overflow. Gods, you are worried about the existence of gods. They're all around us. We see them operating all the time. There's no question about that. The wind god, the god of the sea, the god of death, the goddess of love, they're all around us. Now, the Jewish God pulls off some special effects. Well, bully for you, So join the club. Notice God turned the Nile to blood once. Only once. You know what? I'll bet he snuck up behind the Nile God when he wasn't looking. You see, he didn't dare do it again, right? Because now the Nile God is watching out for him. So he has to go off to other areas. They anthropomorphized natural forces, and they thought of them in polytheistic terms, and they had a story to tell about all of this. Right? When the Babylonians conquered us, they said, well, now you will finally agree that the Babylonian gods are stronger than your God, because we won the war. We're taking you off as captive, a captive population of Babylonia. So what do the Jews say? The Jews say, no, we lost the war because we sinned against our God. You know how that sounded to a Babylonian? You just don't want to admit the truth, that's all. You don't want to give up. Everybody knows that wars are controlled by the forces in heaven, and if a country A victorious over country B, that means country A's God is stronger than country B's. It's obvious, right? You guys are just not willing to deal with logic, not willing to deal with reality. So they had difficulty in acknowledging the existence of a Jewish God. Now you talk about a creator of the universe from nothing. That's a very, very difficult idea. The vast majority of people can't relate to that at all. A great deal of the scientific community refuses to relate to it on principle. They'd rather completely reckless speculation about pre-Big Bang possibilities and multiverses and all the rest than deal with that. So, indeed, the 10 pronouncements of Sinai begin with the words, I am Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Devin Ezra reports that Yehuda Levi, who may have been his father-in-law, asked, why doesn't it begin with, I am Hashem your God who created the universe? If you're trying to give an introduction on the basis of which you're going to have a platform to give commandments, isn't creator of the universe somehow more all-encompassing, more august, more fundamental than just intervening locally in history to take you out of the land of Egypt? And he said, yes, it certainly would be, but the vast majority of the Jewish people couldn't relate to that. The vast majority are not philosophers. Creation out of nothing, well, that's just beyond. But every one of them was a slave. Every one of them existed in slavery for decades, and every one of them was present when the liberation took place. That they can relate to, and that they can be given. So you're talking to people where we think of the God which Judaism delivers to us as the creator of the universe. They thought there are many powers, and Egypt has an empire. Okay, empires have ups and downs, and they win some wars and lose some wars. That's the way human history goes. But when we're on the up, this means because our gods are on the up. Temporarily, your God is dealing us some defeats. Okay, in 100 years, it'll be the other way. And I think, frankly, there's a certain natural intuitiveness about polytheism. Think of the sun shining, how it shines, what its variations are, its cycles. Now compare that with the wind blowing. Is there anything that would lead you naturally to think that the very same source, power, agency that makes the sun shine, makes the wind blow, and makes the tides of the sea, and makes the grass grow? They're just very, very different. To unify it under one explanatory scheme, that took the last 150 years of science. And many historians of science say that the idea of unifying the world is, in scientific terms, comes from monotheism. If there's one creator, he might have one single plan, one single structure, one single basis for it. That might be. But without that, polytheism is very intuitive. Monotheism is very, I think, unintuitive. And when you take that in and you realize that monotheism is a very ancient idea, that should trigger a questioning where the idea came from. If it's not a natural intuition, and if it is unknown in the ancient world, can you just wave a hand and say, yeah, but somebody thought it up after all, funny things happen? Is that enough of an explanation? Maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah.
It says Atris das Kishem
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
It says Atris das Kishem. So it seems like they did have the I mean, at least by the people that people that were in the Midwest said that they did have the capacity then to understand that there's Hashem and understand that there's Hashem who created everything.
Yeah, but of course I wasn't talking about Jews. I was talking about what your intuition would lead you to. The Jews had a heritage from the patriarchs, was preserved at least by the tribe of Levi in Egypt. They went through the plagues in Egypt. They went through the splitting of the sea. They were eating manna that fell down every day. There was a pillar of fire and pillar of cloud. They had a revelation at Sinai, which was the greatest revelation of the humankind. So it's not surprising that they got the idea. My point was only that you wouldn't naturally expect someone to just think it up and have it catch on, because it's an unintuitive idea. Even, as you'll know some Egyptian history, there was one of the pharaohs who they say, as I'll show you this mistake, but some will tell you he was a monotheist because he worshipped only the sun instead of lots of gods. So one historian that I read said, first of all, be very careful. Yes, he worshipped the sun and didn't worship other gods, except for one, and that's himself, because the pharaoh always was a god. He didn't give up on that. So strictly speaking, there were two, not one. And second of all, we think of monotheism and polytheism, but there's a third term, henotheism. Henotheism means I'm worshiping one God. Are there more gods? No prejudice. Maybe yes, maybe no. I've chosen to dedicate myself to this one God. The fact that this pharaoh, who for his generation only introduced this, and then afterwards his temples were destroyed, the empire went to rot, and the people were disgusted with it, they moved the capital. They didn't want to have any truck with it. The fact that he chose to worship only the sun god and himself doesn't mean that he's a monotheist. Doesn't mean that he has a vision of this power being responsible for the whole of the universe. He's simply saying, I choose to live my life in terms of this power. That's henotheism, not monotheism. So you don't have it. You just don't have it. But for the Jewish people, they saw things that they couldn't possibly deny. They saw things which were undeniable from given their tradition and what they saw.
How come Hashem had to say, "Like Hashem, like Kef"? He should have just said, "I'm going to create the world."
Sorry, I'm not getting you.
Why did Hashem have to say by the Sarah Stibus, "Like Hashem, like Kef"? He could have just said, "Who created the world?" Meaning.
So I just answered that. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi asked that question, and he said, "If you'll make your introduction to a nation, I'm the one who created the world." The vast majority of people are going to say, I don't know what you're talking about.
But with another pasuk that Atris Ladas, we see that they did know.
No, there it doesn't speak about creating. There it just says, I'm running the world. There it says, I'm running the world. There's nothing about creating there at all. I am the only power that runs the world. Doesn't say anything about creating the world. Yeah.
It was like, okay, today, like with people who say they talk to the dead and stuff, is that practice real, firstly, and is it okay to get involved with it?
Okay, now here I want to be understood. I had this out with a rabbi in Europe one time, and he misrepresented me, so I was really quite disappointed. Certainly, it could be. Not even just because leprechauns could be, so anything could be. I give away possibilities free. But within the fact that the creator of the universe is running the world, there's no question that it could be. But there's a gigantic leap from could be to is real. The fact that something could be is not a good reason to believe in it. I need to have some direct evidence that it's true. Now, people say that they talk to the dead and so forth and so on. It would be very easy to check this. It would be very easy to check this. The dead person could tell him, you know, when I was 16, I buried something in the forest. I'll tell you exactly where it is. You go to the family and say, listen, I have received a message from your great-grandfather, and he said that spot in the forest, he buried something. Let's go take a look. You dig it up, and there are signs that the dirt has not been disturbed for 150 years, and you find exactly what you predicted. That would be evidence. It would be very easy to do that. Why don't they do that? Why doesn't that ever happen? You know, that people are abducted by aliens in spaceships, and they're brought back. They never bring back a paperclip. They never bring back a pencil, you know, something, just one little thing. No, they just have a story to tell. Well, frankly, that makes me suspicious. Something that could be easily verified, and the verification doesn't take place, it makes me suspicious. I don't dismiss it, but on the other hand, I don't accept it unless I have more reliable information. I think that's the right attitude to take. Don't be doctrinaire. People are doctrinaire about science. Some people think science has explained everything, and they know it's got everything in a bag, which is ridiculous, but that's what some people say. Other people say science will never have everything, because every time you have another theory, there's always more stuff that they haven't explained and won't be able to explain. I can't identify with either point of view. Let's just sit and watch the passing show and see how it goes. Maybe they will get to a day when they explain everything that we know, and then maybe there'll be a reason to think that what they're telling us is the ultimate truth about the world, and maybe not. Certainly not there today. There's lots and lots of stuff that science has no ability to explain, and there are contradictions in contemporary science. But don't be doctrinaire. Just take what you have good enough evidence to accept, and the rest of it, leave, and don't be nervous. And simply say, we don't know. We'll wait and see.
The word higher power, and is it a term in science at all?
Now, I don't know what locus you're talking about. You're talking about the 12 steps? The 12 steps talk about a higher power. The Black Book of Addiction talks about a higher power. But other than that...
It's not like the scientific...
No. There are basic laws, of which they think there are 4, although there are lots of things they can't explain at the present time, so maybe there are more. Those are the basic laws. All the other laws are supposed to be just combinations of those basic laws. Strong force, the weak force, electromagnetism, and gravity.
It's a power that's higher.
I mean, 6 miles high? I mean, you don't mean that. So what do you mean by higher? More, you mean?
Like more, it's...
Science will stop at the four fundamental laws of nature. And they won't go any further than that. Typically.
There is the research upgrade when he has a production of Divine Information.com's website.
Who's this?
Rabbi Mizrahi.
Oh yeah, Mizrahi. Yeah.
So he has the life after death. I mean, I got a share from him that I listened to, but I know he hasn't been into it. And there he does bring books that do discuss cases where they say something and they go look for it. And he does bring.
Okay, so I'll tell you, this is very interesting. There's a source on the web which, if you're interested in philosophy, is very authoritative. It's called the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, run by Stanford University Philosophy Department. And they have articles on many, many fundamental issues in philosophy, written by the top professional philosophers, well organized, and usually well expressed. Yes, it's written for professional philosophers, so from time to time there are technical terms that are used, but some of them are more open to the average public. For example, they have an article on democracy, which if you believe in democracy, you think democracy is important, would be educational. And they have an entry on life after death. Now, this fellow is a professional philosopher, and he looked at this literature, and he is willing to say that the literature is interesting, it's suggestive, and it has not, as of now, been adequately scientifically explained without presuming there is life after death, and he leaves it as an open question. So, if you're interested in that subject, I would recommend that that source to you. These near-death experiences. One of the funniest things that came out about 5 years ago is when people have these near-death experiences, certain parts of the brain are active. Certain parts of the brain are functioning. We can tell with an MRI. So, well then, it's just contained within the brain. It's not real. Now let me ask you a question. You look at a table and they watch your brain with an MRI. Will some part of your brain be active when you're watching the table? You bet. You bet. When you're perceiving a table, certain parts of your brain are active. The fact that your brain is active doesn't mean there isn't a reality that you're perceiving. You can't perceive anything without the brain being active. So because you see that the brain is active, that means it isn't real. Excuse me, that's not a good inference. So if you want information on life after death, philosophically competent information, that's a good place to look. And it's a good place to look in general for philosophically first-rate presentations of philosophically important material.
He's bringing work all these different all these different people that investigated this, and they're bringing tons and tons of cases.
Right.
That people said things and then checked it up and they found that it was true. They're not.
Right. There are people who are in comas and who can tell you what the conversations were that were going on in the room when their brain showed no brain waves. Right. So.
I give like one example. Like let's say a person is clinically dead and comes back alive.
Yeah.
So he will be able to tell you everything that's happening in every room in the hospital. And you look at the cameras and you see that that's exactly the same.
Okay. It's enough if he can tell you what tests were done on him while he was clinically dead. Right? The other rooms in the hospital. According to the way we understand clinical death, you can't know something like that. Good. So people have been brought back from what they call a vegetative state. One fellow was in a vegetative state for 7 years, and it was completely. They wanted to pull the plugs and everything else, and he was brought back, and he reported on on things that happened during that time. There's a lot they don't know. I would make a list of the things that you don't know. How the working of the human body, let alone questions of soul, just the working of the human body. Be from here till tomorrow. I got to go because I have to teach upstairs.